4 billion people play games every day. Games user researchers are the people who try to make sure that they have a good experience doing so. So join us as we explore the challenge of crafting and evaluating user experiences in games and beyond. My name is Herr Professor Dr. Lennart Nacke, and with me are my co-hosts Anders Drachen and Pejman Mirzababai. Over to you, Anders.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Anders Drachen. I'm a professor at the Metaverse Lab at the University of Southern Denmark. I've been working across games academia and industry for about 20 years now, mainly focusing on game analytics. Over to you, Pejman.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pejman Mirzababai. I'm an associate professor at Ontario Tech University. And I lead the UXR lab there, where we take projects, both academic and industry. And I've been involved in the games user research field since 2009, where I started my PhD. And at the same time, I worked for Vertical Slice and then Player Research before I moved to Canada and take a basically university role. I like to think that I usually I'm active in both environment and both academic and industry side. I think most notably was at 2015, where I took a couple of months off from my university role, and I lead the user research team at Execution Labs, where I had the chance to work with around 19 indie studios with their user research needs. I'm very excited to be here as part of this podcast, where we talk about user research and basically the material from the Games User Research book.
All right, awesome. Introductions are out of the way, so let us get started. Today, we'll be talking about collaboration in games user research across academia and industry. Historically, this is something that we have at the same time both excelled at in the game sector and been really bad at. For example, our book on games user research is an example of an incredible community, a community effort that has involved more than 100 people from academia and industry, and we're all working together. On the other hand, game companies are largely but not conclusively absent from university programs that are training the next generations of games user researchers. So this is an interesting state of affairs, but it might make sense to start with a bit of a historical overview. How did games user research get started, and what role has industry and academia played in the 50 plus years of games user research? Well, it was pioneered by Atari in the early 1970s, and games user research came of age in the 1990s with Sony, with titles such as Crash Bandicoot 2, and later at Microsoft Studios with Bill Fulton's group in the USA, where Age of Empires was the first game where it was successfully applied to. And there's hundreds of games user researchers and user experience designers working worldwide now, particularly at larger studios and at publishers like Activision, EA, Epic Games, King, Microsoft, Riot Games, Rovio, Scopely, Sony, and Ubisoft, as well as a number of smaller studios, in addition to several external UX/UI consultancies. Today, games user research and user experience processes are carried out at all stages of game development, from pre-production all the way to post-release and to support. So since 2009, the IGDA GRUGSIG, previously called the GERSIG, has been instrumental in helping researchers around the world network and share ideas. So today we want to ask, what are the concrete benefits of industry and academia working together in GER? And how can companies support student training? So first, I want to get started and ask this question. How do you think, maybe Pejman has a lot of experience working with industry, and Anders, of course, has also done a large industry-focused academic network in the UK before. And so both of you, what do you think, what are the concrete benefits of industry and academia working together in games user research?
I can get us started. Particularly, I want to link this back to what Lennart just described, like around the history of games user research. And one of those important moments, I think, maybe in that, or milestones in the history was, I would say, in 2009, where Vertical Slice started as, I would say, probably the first service studio that exclusively offered user research services to the game industry. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because that basically span out of University of Sussex, entrepreneurship initiatives. And I received my training during my PhD while I was also working at Vertical Slice. So that was an amazing kind of setup that I basically got to work on many industry projects and while doing my PhD and learning at the same time, and kind of applied all my learning onto those projects, and hopefully provided also kind of a useful insight to the companies that we worked with at the time. So that's kind of for me personally, like in my experience, that the opportunity that I had to see the application of my research into real game, that was invaluable, and that kind of shaped my career moving forward.
I guess there are a lot of similarities with how I got started also, although as I was called as the age president here, because I'm the oldest dude in the company here. Back when I was starting out in the early 2000s, a lot of things were also different, and a lot of things were also easier than today. We were very much like we barely started looking at behavioral data from games. User research in games was still something that was very informal. The whole academic sector when it comes to looking at games, with a serious scientific mindset, was still very, very new. I distinctly remember a conference in Tokyo in 2007, one of the early DIAC conferences, which was amazing, because we were for the first time, we were a couple of hundred people all doing academic research on games from everywhere, from the humanities and philosophy all the way over to sort of hardcore AI, gathered in the same place. It was pretty cool, and people were talking about these strange ideas, and you had audiences from a lot of different domains sitting in the same room. Anyway, going back to the actual question that you were asking, Leonard, the main benefit of collaboration across academia and industry is that we're good at different things, right? And by combining our knowledge and our expertise, we achieve something that is larger than the sum of the parts. It's really that simple. In academia, we often have the luxury of spending many years becoming incredibly specialized and focused on a particular thing. And when we can apply that very deep expertise, that's when things start getting really powerful. And that's also where working with academics perhaps is a step up from many design agencies that may have very broad knowledge, but also shallow compared to someone who's been spending 30 years becoming an absolute expert in how to measure player experience, right? That doesn't mean that these collaborations are always easy. Universities and university academics, they have their own priorities, which can come off as opaque and strange to the industry. For example, our obsession with academic papers, which are kind of like currency for us. It's our NFTs. It's our crypto, right? You can. It's almost like these non-fungible tokens. Like I can trade you one Kai paper for two FTD papers, etc. Right? We need to publish our research, right? But for example, in my case, if I'm working with companies and building prediction models that describe player behavior in their games, like, maybe publishing that kind of very confidential information is not the right thing to do. And then often what happens is that the partnership type changes, where then what happens is that the company then basically buys the academic's time. That in itself is great. It's fine. It's a good example of how academia and industry can collaborate, but it perhaps doesn't lead to knowledge that can benefit the community, something that I think the games user research community, as exemplified by the games research and user experience special interest group under IGDA is a very good example of, and which was started back in 2009. Based off the excellent early work at Sony and Microsoft and Atari and sort of the dawning academic interest in this domain also. Bungie had some excellent user research already back then also, right? And that's what got us started, right?
Can I add a quick point here? I just wanted to highlight early in our conversation that one thing I've seen talking to many companies and also many profs, that they may be too focused on research collaboration. And although like research and R&D basically type of work, I just wanted to kind of make sure that we also kind of consider there are other ways that we can collaborate. Like there are training programs, there are internships, there are sponsorships, there are co-developing courses. So there are so many things that we can work together, and research collaboration and R&D is only one of them. And probably the most complex one is R&D. So there are other easier stuff that's possible to do that could get us started faster.
I think that's an important distinction that you're making there, right?
Definitely.
Like it's definitely one of the struggles. But you also have to understand that not everyone shares that mindset, right? Like not everyone actually wants to actually work with industry, right? Like often people are quite happy following their own academic path and doing something along those ways. I think the three of us and definitely a lot of our colleagues are a little bit different in terms of that we actually like that validation of seeing our work being used in the industry, and seeing that we can actually have an impact on industry practices somehow. So I don't think that's necessarily the usual, Pejman, right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like on both sides, one thing, like a step one is to kind of think and reflect on the motivation for setting up that collaboration. Like both on the academic side, like if you're talking to profs, instructor, like what's the main motivation that you want from collaborating with an industry partner? Is it to validate your research idea? Is it to get new research ideas and work on? Is it to help your students find job? Is it to help your university, kind of diversify maybe the type of projects and funding they receive? And then on the same side, on the industry side, like what's the motivation there? Like, are you thinking to, do you need some help with your research that maybe you don't have a, knowledge or a staff member to take on, or maybe you are just interested in getting to know kind of a student so you can hire them, so have a good talent pipeline. Or there are actually cases that I talk to, and then they just want to make some donations, so they have some extra money they want to help universities, and they want to donate that towards like building a lab or a scholarship for a student. So there are loads of opportunities for those collaboration, but it goes all back to what you mentioned, like in terms of the motivation behind it. Like as a prof, if you are interested in doing kind of a theoretical type of research and publish it, then probably you're fine, continue doing that. You don't really have to explore industry collaboration. If you are excited to see how your research might have application in the industry, or like help your students maybe find a job faster, then that might be something to think about and consider.
But can I maybe provoke you guys a little bit? So I was all the way back in 2014. I was asked to give a talk at an event organized by one of the very large game companies. I won't be mentioning any names here, but it was one of the big ones. They had gathered a component of their research group in a larger city, and they were having an annual meeting, and I realized upon entering that room, where there were more than 100 people, that there was more research capacity in that room than the combined sum total of everyone working within my domain worldwide at that time. I often feel like working with game analytics. I generally calculate that across academia and industry, we are outcompeted by about a factor of 500 on the academic side. There are vastly bigger numbers of people working in the industry actually doing research to the degree where I often feel that a lot of very interesting stuff is happening within the companies, not within academia. And I know that there are also way more people doing actual user research in games working within the industry than in academia. Interestingly enough, a lot of our colleagues in the industry have an academic background, at least a PhD, right? So they've all been trained by academia and came up that way. But given this sort of this variation in the amount of person power that exists, how does working with academia still stay relevant?
I don't think it's necessarily relevant. It's more like it's a different ball game that you're playing there. Once you're in industry, you have a lot of really good pay, for a lot of sort of mid to senior level researcher. The pay is really good. The support is really good. You actually get to work on an exciting product. So I don't really think it's like the metrics are not the same. Like, people are in there and trying to do that because they actually want to build better games. They want to understand better games. It's not so much. I feel like in my job anyways, I feel like I'm much more focused on understanding humans in general. Like how does a human tick and how do they fit into this world, and like, why do games exist? Why do we need to play? These kind of larger questions. Whereas when you're in the industry, it's more like like, why is the gun selection in Destiny so addictive? Because it's so well designed, and addictive is obviously the wrong word, but how is it so engaging that we can upgrade guns? Which nobody ever thought that was going to be a good thing.
I was just going to quickly add something that. I agree with that, and with the research power and research capacity there. But also, I want to highlight that, there might be handful of those those large companies that have such a team, have such a big research team that they can take those projects. There are a lot more, like a smaller or mid-sized studios that they don't necessarily have that research capacity. That doesn't mean they don't do research. Many of them are still active and they're doing research, but there could be ways that we don't necessarily need to target the biggest game companies and then try to do research with them. As I said earlier, there is a motivation. So the bigger game companies, they may be more interested in some form of a brand building, talent pipeline, and things like that we can contribute as academics. And then there could be a smaller companies that they might be interested in, getting our help to actually do R&D. I think there is that kind of goes back to that motivation as well for partnership.
So, Pejman, what kind of advice could we give to SME companies in the industry who are sort of interested in, or who have a particular challenge, or just interested in figuring out how do I work with academia? Like, how should they approach us folks on the academic side, and vice versa? How should academia approach small and medium-sized companies? What's the right language, and how do we set expectations and all that kind of stuff?
That's kind of that's a type of question that needs a lot of reflection.
Hard question, right? Yeah.
Explanation and consideration and different factors. But if I want to kind of make it into a kind of a really high level, maybe generic advice that might be applicable to many companies, I maybe distinguish them into different levels. So one initial level is that you don't have any research staff. But you realize that you have some research need. And then let's talk about more focus on like games user research. So let's say you are building a game, you heard that, there are like thing called playtesting and user research, and you're not doing any of them. Then you're probably gonna, search and find a couple of, service companies that would offer that as a service. So you can kind of hire them and then they do it for you. Or you may say, okay, let's see if you can do that through academic collaboration. So in that context, I think the relationship going to be more like a service relationship. So, the academics have the expertise to run studies, they have the equipment, they have the lab. So, and they probably are willing to do it cheaper than a, commercial service company, and then run those studies and provide you with some feedback. Then a slightly higher level, there might be, again, studios that they have like a couple of research staff. They do their own playtesting. They already have relationship maybe with a couple of service companies that they, help them with playtesting. But there might be cases in development that they need some form of a, research contribution into their game. For example, I'm working with a company now called Stitch Media. They are based in Toronto, and they are developing a VR game. And they're using gesture control rather than physical controller. So that's kind of a really cool area, because now you don't have any physical controller. So they're kind of redesigning all the interaction. So they have their own internal testing team and research team, but the research question here is a bit more complex for a small studio to tackle. So that's where like we come in as in my lab, and we've been we partnered with them for the last year, and we have basically the capacity to rapidly develop prototype, test them, and then share the knowledge with them. And then some of the findings that we have are basically making it into the final game, which is like super cool to see, and also an amazing experience for students. And then the next level is like those bigger companies that you mentioned. They have like a strong research capacity, and then but usually what I've seen, there are two areas that I could partner with them. One is through training and talent pipeline. So basically help them to find more researcher. And then the other one is through like a sponsorship and kind of helping them build brand. Or promote their brand among the population, a students population, which is often kind of match very well with that branding. So they are like in my university, we have a very close partnership with Ubisoft Toronto. They provide a scholarship for our gaming students. They are partnering with us in some co-creation of training program. Which is like super awesome. So we are not doing any R&D work with them. We are basically doing partnership in terms of building training, and then they are generous enough to sponsor our students and provide a scholarship, which is super cool.
Yeah, I think that
answered your question.
I think that's really good. Like I think really at the heart of it is thinking like how do companies support student training as well, right? Like not just the collaboration, the research effort, but like how do we actually build the things like Swagger, which we presented at the GUR Summit a long time ago when it was started, and is a big Canadian training program for games user research. And actually one of the first students from us, Gio, he just got hired and is working in games user research. And so it's really kind of great to see once that happens. But Pejman is obviously working very closely with Ubisoft there in Toronto, and working at setting up these connections quite well. So
what about situations where you are you're building a new relationship, like one or more academics have found one or more small companies, and there's a mutual interest in building something. What I've often found in my experience is that often you start by doing something small, something like having like a couple of master students or something like that. You build a small but highly valuable project, something that showcases that yes, this that this collaboration can actually work. and can deliver results that are valuable both on the academic front and the industry front. And then you build off that success story, and you build up a larger partnership, right? Some of my relationships with the companies I've been building over the past 15 years, right? So but all started out with a small thing, right? Where we did a small project and it turned out to be valuable, right? There's also been other situations where we did a small thing and it turned out not to be very valuable. Okay, fair enough, right? We try something else or whatever, right? But what do you guys think about that overall strategy when you're sort of building up your partnership? Do you have a different take on it, or?
That's also a really good question or consideration, because something that we know is, building those relationship and partnership would take time. So it's not something that it happen immediately. In most of the projects that I have, I know the team member and the company for maybe few years, 5-6 years before we and it's like a gradual improvement. Couple of tips I can give to the our listeners are that, one thing I always look for is to see if there is an existing partnership through like already established program. So, for example, I look at our internship program. That's something that the faculty or the university is running, and I look at who are the companies that hire our students as an intern. So that already shows me a couple of things. One is the need, and then second is some form of a validation, if you like, that our students are proving to be valuable to those companies. And then I can then approach the company and say, hey, you guys have hired 5 of our students as an intern, and that seems to be a need that you have, and it seems that we are addressing that need. How about we build some form of a program that we can provide this on a regular basis, and you can actually participate in training these students even earlier, before they are even coming to your internship. So that's like a one way of establishing those. The other one, which I think Canada is doing quite great, like Canadian government or agencies here, funding agencies. So there are usually smaller grants that you could apply, and then start something before you go and apply for a bigger grant. So in our case with Stitch Media, we started with I think it's called MyTax Accelerator grant. So we applied for one unit, so let's say around $60,000, and that allowed us to work with them for around a year. And we both parties enjoyed that collaboration. They found it useful, we found it useful. And then after that, we went for a much bigger grant. It's another agency called ANSERC, and they have a grant called Alliance Grant. And then we basically applied for something close to $250,000 for a 2 years project. So now we basically expanded our work and our partnership based on the previous successes. So I think I'm not sure I'm sure probably other countries have similar opportunities in terms of fundings and government grant, but I think the one we have in Canada is actually quite good in kind of establishing those initial relationship and seeing the value. So if I want to summarize it, there are 2 pieces I usually look at. One is traction, and the other is validation, and that's usually how I kind of decide which company I want to approach.
Yeah, I'll just add a quick one. So first of all, I absolutely agree with you, Pejman, that there is a lot of public funding that specifically goes into trying to help build relationships across academia and industry, and sometimes that funding is fairly accessible, and the application process is fairly speedy also. Otherwise, one of the big problems we have in academia is that we have a very interesting industry partner, but we need to go and apply for funding first. 2 years later, we may have that funding, right? But that's a really, really long time horizon. So the initiatives that Canada excels at, I'll have to admit, the kinds of initiatives that rapidly gives you some funding to build a collaboration with the company, usually where the company then pays a part of the project, fantastic. That's a good way to get stuff started with a very minimal upfront investment, right? But I think the most valuable piece of advice that I can give here is always when you start up a new collaboration, be transparent about your needs. Academia and industry are foundationally very different in terms of how the incentives work, right? And if in order to build a successful relationship across two different ways of thinking, really, you need to be very transparent about what your needs are, right? So that, for example, the company partner can go and say, look, we have this thing, we're very interested in exploring it more, but we are launching in 6 months, so we kind of need an answer within a 6-month period, right? And on the academic side, we can say, well, look, if we're not going into this with any funding, we would need to write a fairly high impact research paper, like which would require these and these and these things, right? Starting out with transparency really helps when you are talking about communities that have slightly different languages, right? And we know this well from the games industry also, right? With like we have so many different stakeholders, so many different languages, and being able to communicate across those languages is just very, very important. And transparency and mutual respect is absolutely vital here, right? Sorry, that was a longer monologue, but yeah.
Nicely said.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is always to think about what are you training people for, like what kind of collaboration. I think both of you have touched on that, and it's because it's really not, which is why I admire what Pejman's doing there. Like Ubisoft is obviously a great, a big partner. Often the larger studios don't have money that they want to invest in academic research just because of how the way that these collaborations go. So really showing that value is key, and so he's obviously done a good job in showing what value it can provide to that company. And I find that's like, maybe as if some academics are listening in, that's sort of, the struggle. If you're an academic interested in games, you'd like to work with an industry partner. It's usually not as easy as working with a bank or a different type of company, because with them, it's sort of natural to invest a little bit of their funds into into research, period, not just user research, but any kind of research, right? And so we don't see that as much yet, and so we'd hope to see it more. I guess that's sort of the inspirational bit here that comes from the work that us and our colleagues have done.
Yeah, there are two quick things. I know we are almost out of time. I wanted to highlight. One is a presentation that we did together in the last year Games User Research Summit, and we talked about how academic industry partnership can help towards kind of making positive changes in our community and in the industry. The other one, since we mentioned the partnership I have with Ubisoft Toronto at the moment, so we are actually doing a presentation on that at this year's Games User Research Summit, where we basically provide kind of in-depth detail of how we set up that collaboration, what it includes, what sort of training modules we decided to teach, and basically things that we learned from doing that together. And we hope that would be a valuable knowledge or insight for colleagues both in industry and academia that may use that to set up similar initiatives.
Pejman, how do people access that? Like if you're not at the summit, will the talks be made
so one thing that the Games User Research community and the IGDA GROX is doing very well is everything going to be online on YouTube. And then I think once we have these podcasts available, we share the link as part of the comments or the podcast description for this session. The summit is happening towards the end of May, so the talks are not available yet. But obviously, by I think after the summit or during the summit, they will be available online, and we will share them.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the point where we also say thank you and mention that this games user research or games research and user experience now a special interest group with more than 3,000 members worldwide has been really an incredible community that has helped us. We've seen people like Steve Bromley start a mentorship program, which was just amazing. And obviously you can always search for that Gruxic, or it's I think it's grux.org, maybe the website. And is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And so, I just wanted to say
great community, great people.
Yeah, that has really helped. Okay, this has been incredibly interesting, and there's lots more to talk about and to dive into from this early conversation about collaboration games user research. And we'll explore this and other topics in the future. And for more on games user research, you should always go to gerbook.com and check out the book that we had the honor of editing on behalf of the community, with more than 100 people participating in shaping this book. So big thanks again to everyone that was involved in making this book happen. To our listeners today, thank you for listening in. We hope it was enjoyable and informative. And all the best to everyone. It was really great talking to you, and we look forward to our next episode. Thank you.